And we're live. Okay, so let's start off with a couple things. Number one is last time, some of you have had me before, some of you haven't, and I actually forgot all about telling you who I am. So if you have had me before, this is old material for you. So I teach here. This quarter I'm teaching 2 classes. Next quarter I'm teaching full-time, okay, here. I also teach at Cal State San Marcos, and then I'm wrapping up teaching an online class for the University of Maryland. I'm not probably going to do that much anymore. I also run my own company, mostly consulting, but I have a product that once I make enough consulting revenue, my plan is to launch a product for the legal market. I think that's good enough. I used to work in big business, so I used to work for Oracle, a bunch of startups, PayPal, eBay. That's kind of where my background is. So for today, the first thing I want to talk about is the project. So your concept paper will be due in just under 2 weeks. So it's 2 weeks from Tuesday. How many of you did not form a group yet? Anybody not in a group? Okay. One person. At the end of class, we need a group that's maybe looking for one other person. Gentleman back here in the blue sweatshirt, okay, needs a group to join, okay? Anybody right now willing to add them to your group? Okay, there you go, right there in front of you. Okay, perfect. Yes. Okay, we need another group over here. Another group willing to take on someone? If not, I'll assign you to a group. The key thing is schedule. You got a group? Okay, cool. You're good. All right. Has anybody met with your group outside of the class and done a meeting yet? Okay. Your first meeting minutes will be due on Tuesday. Just a little reminder about that. Now, moving on to the project. I'm not going to provide the details of what your business plan needs to look like yet because we haven't even covered the material. But what I do want to say about that project is there will be research involved. You're going to need to go to the library or do research online through the library. If you want to do it online, if you're on campus, you just go to their website and do your research. If you're off campus, you have to set up something called a VPN, and there should be instructions on the library website on how to do that. Okay? It's not as easy to access things when you're not on the campus. Your best bet for this project might be to go to the library, talk to a librarian first. Once you get some ideas of where to go for the research, then you can look online. That would be my suggestion. You're going to have to do research on your market. Okay? You're going to have to do research on how big the market is, things like that. The other thing you're going to have to do, and this is something you can't do through the library necessarily, is you're going to need to do some customer research. And so what do I mean by that? We'll talk a little bit about that today, is you're going to need to go out and do maybe some focus groups, interviews, maybe a survey, okay? And I'm not talking students. You don't want to survey other students, okay, especially undergraduate students. Where you can find some information, let's use an example. Let's say you decide that you want to start something in the genetic space. Some resources on the campus you could utilize for that, because I don't imagine any of you have any contacts in the genetics industry, is to talk to professors who are teaching some sort of course related to genetics. You could go talk to them about your idea and get some market research there. Another area is, I know I said no students, what I meant was undergraduate students. PhD students in, say, genetics, if that's your area, could be very useful to you to get information, okay? A lot of PhD students have already had jobs in the field for some time. They go back to school to get their PhD. So that could be an option for you. And how do you find those students? Well, you go to the department website, you look up some names, and you send out some emails. If you don't get a response, you pick up the phone and you call those individuals. If you're looking at something like, say, like an internet company or something, well, you can probably find people online that you could ask questions of. An internet company would be a little bit easier to go talk to people out in the marketplace. So if you've decided you've come up with an idea that's the next Airbnb, you could start talking to hotel owners on the internet or people who are trying to rent out their houses on Airbnb and see what they hate about it, okay, and see what kind of improvement you can make. So you're going to have to do some research for that project. That you're going to do a long time before you ever write anything, okay? So that research is going to be very important. Any questions about that? Okay. Once we get through the course a little further, I will publish a little bit more information about what's expected on the business plan itself, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and skip ahead to where we were the other day. So the other day we were talking about entrepreneurs and what people like Larry Page, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, et cetera, have in common. Okay? Well, they identified opportunities, they allocated resources, and then they executed on their vision. And they probably had a lot of people to help them because they didn't have the knowledge in necessarily all the areas. Steve Jobs was helped out by Woz. Woz was a genius technically, still is. Okay. Without him, Steve Jobs wouldn't have been able to be successful with Apple. Okay. Looking at Elon Musk took a different approach. Yeah, he built a team, but before he ever built a team for, say, SpaceX, he went out and researched rocket science. He wasn't a rocket scientist. He just thought about it and said, I think this is an opportunity. And he started talking to people in the rocket field. And then he got some ideas on some books to read, and he started reading books. And now the guy's a genius when it comes to rocket science. But he also has a lot of engineers who work for him as well. Okay. As far as other ingredients that are necessary, we need to have innovative ideas. Okay. And my second unit of slides that we'll talk about for chapter 2 is there's a section on innovation, and I'll talk about the different types of innovation. You need to have strong leadership. Okay? You have to be able to make decisions. You need a leader who can make the hard, tough decisions. Okay? You need to have creativity. Okay? And you need to have grit. You're going to be working a lot of hours if you're forming a startup. Okay? No investor is going to want to give you money if you're not willing to put in the time. And that's one of the reasons why I haven't gone out to seek outside investment yet is I want to still be able to teach. I want to still be able to have a life right now. I want to have that freedom. And so that's why I've chosen to bootstrap my organization with funding from consulting fees and things like that. Okay. Now, at some point, I might get to the point where I decide I want to get some outside investors. But at this point, I don't want to deal with that. Depending on the type of business you're in, you could bootstrap. How many of you know what WordPress is? Okay. WordPress is owned by a company called Automatic. It's a bootstrapped company. I think they've since taken on some funding for growth, but at its heart, it was a bootstrap company. How many of you have heard Basecamp before? Right? Basecamp is a fully bootstrapped company. They started as a consulting firm, built project management software, pivoted, and now they sell this project management software, all self-funded by their own revenue. Okay. Now, how many of you have heard of WeWork? There should be a lot of us. Okay. WeWork is a venture-funded company. They made some money, but they haven't made any profit. Okay. They've taken the approach of going out and getting venture capital to expand fast. And that's okay. For certain types of businesses, it's okay. In their case, it's actually fizzled out and there's been a lot of issues, as we've probably seen in the news. But that grit is very important. When I worked for a startup a few years ago, everybody was expected to have that level of grit. By the way, the live stream and recording won't have any video. It's only going to have the slides and the audio. Okay. I can tell you when I worked for this startup, it was a small startup, initially bootstrapped, not because she didn't want the money, she couldn't get anybody to fund her idea. Okay. She chose, and this is why I said don't do education. Okay. Education is a tough market to get any funding on. Ed tech companies rarely get much funding, if any. Okay. So you're not going to be able to really scale the idea. It's really going to be one of those SME type entrepreneur opportunities. So you're not going to necessarily be able to get a lot of funding. And I'm going to have the, what's it called? The Epic Center here on campus that does entrepreneurship come talk to us at some point in the quarter. And the reason for that is I want you to understand what investors are looking for, because they're looking at it from an investor perspective. They're actually bringing companies that are forming on the campus here by PhD students and professors, getting them funding, launching them, and become a viable business. Okay. I have nothing against the education ideas from those of you who were in 171, but I'm just trying to be realistic about investment. The likelihood of you getting any investment in this market is pretty low for a company like that. So let's focus on things that we can get investment for, because that's the purpose of your business plan, is to be able to bring in outside investors, improve your business model. Now, when I worked for this startup, we didn't have a lot of money when I joined. I was told we had a lot of money. Okay? I was told, oh, we have $35 million and all this. I never actually bothered to do my homework and check up on it, because it's very difficult to do with a private company. Okay? Their financials aren't public record. What I didn't realize was, even though it was a private company, some of their information about their investments was available on the SEC website. I just never bothered to look because they're not a public company. What I found out was they had never tried to raise more than a couple $1,000,000. So there was no way possible for them to have $35 million unless the CEO had $35 million in her bank account, which she did not. So what we ended up having to do was do a lot with very little. Okay? If we had to solve a problem, we solved it by spending hours working on the problem. We didn't go out and say, I want to go buy a product from you or you. We went out and we came up with a solution to the problem. And believe me, we had to solve a lot of problems. We were doing e-voting, okay? How many of you vote? Anybody? A few people vote, okay. It used to be that you would use these punch cards and these lever machines, and they would all be set up ahead of time with the different offices, and then they would punch a card, and then that card would be read by a tabulation machine, okay? Eventually, we ended up at the point where we had these ballots, and you punch a thing in on a piece of paper, and that's where the Florida election in 2000 had these hanging chads that were still attached to the paper. No one knew who they voted for, okay? So there was a solution of, okay, well, we're going to build voting machines that are electronic. Sounds great in concept, but the early implementations were not secure, had all sorts of issues. They were made by the company, by the way, that makes ATM machines, or used to make ATM machines, okay? And they had a lot of issues on their own. So we've actually reverted back to paper ballots. Now they're more of an optically scanned, like a Scantron. That's how a lot of voting is done in a lot of states. Well, this company said, well, why don't we build a secure method to do e-voting using a tablet, a computer, a phone? Heck, you could do it from home if you wanted to eventually, if the laws allowed it. So that's what we went after. We were chasing this election market. And I'll tell you, one of the problems with government is it's a very slow sales cycle. Decisions take a long time. Not a great way for a startup that's trying to bring in revenue quickly to survive to actually work in. So we chose a really bad market to be in. If we were a larger company with revenue, we could have sustained ourselves for longer. We eventually had to branch out and get revenue from private sources. So we would go out and we would do work for PricewaterhouseCoopers and Deloitte. I've heard those names before. Then the Oscars and Emmys became our customers. And so we were bringing in some money doing that. But we realized we had to pivot into a new area because we just weren't making enough money to sustain the level of expenses that we had. So we started building new products. And it's great to come up with new products because the customers would come up to us and say, at a conference or whatever, and say, oh my gosh, we got this really great idea, but no one's doing it. Could you do it for us? And of course, we'd always say, yeah, we'll do it for you. We never realized what that, from a resource perspective, what that was. And from a grip perspective, we were constantly working 20-hour days. It's not uncommon in a startup to work 20-hour days, okay? That's very key in a startup to have that grit, okay? People who come in thinking it's a 9-to-5 job are going to be sorely disappointed. And that gets me to another point here that I'll come up to in a few minutes. But another example, okay? I worked for this company in San Diego. It was a SaaS startup. They were not small though. They've been around for about, at the time, 10 years, okay? They'd taken on a lot of capital. They had investors. Disney, everybody's heard of them. ESPN, everyone's heard of them. Ticketmaster, they were investors in the company. Company had grown. At the time I joined, I think we were at about $100 million in revenue. Nothing to sneeze at, okay? The problem was we were at $100 million in revenue, but it was costing us $140, $150 million a year to operate the company. And then on top of that, we were trying to develop a brand new product so we could shift everything over. We needed a lot of capital to be sustainable. So one of the challenges we had to deal with was we've got the revenue coming in, we don't have enough money, so we constantly have to bring in investment dollars to keep the company afloat. We were trying to build a new product so we could get away from the old way of doing things where we had every company we'd ever acquired still. So we had 100 different websites, 100 different applications we were supporting, okay? This all cost money. So what we ended up doing was we built a brand new platform, and we built it in the method that I'll talk about in the second chapter using the lean startup method, okay? We started with what is the minimum product we need to get out. And some of you from 171 are gonna be like, okay, I know what you're talking about, I'm gonna go sleep now, okay? But what's the minimum product we need to get out to get our customers happy and get them on this new platform? Because the sooner we get them on the new platform, the sooner we can shut everything else off, save a lot of money, and be a successful organization. We ended up going public. When we went public, we were at about $400 million in revenue 2 years, actually, sorry, it was about a year and a half later, we went public. Okay. The company was sold for a little over $1 billion a few years later to a private equity firm. Okay. It's since been broken up, but at the time it was a $1 billion company, and it started off as a very small company. We were successful because we listened to what our customers had to say, and we built our product accordingly. Okay. So when you're a lean startup, you're really looking at what the customers want, which is where we'll talk about market research and things a little later. But entrepreneurs, what we do is we identify and pursue solutions among problems. So we're going to try to find a problem that we can solve. Okay, lot sort of thing. We look about what are the possibilities that pursue people's needs, and are there opportunities? Okay, so these are some of the things that we look to solve. Some of you remember my little clicker? I lost it. I was trying to find it. I couldn't find it. Okay. So how do we find the sweet spot for what type of business do we pursue? And so we use this Venn diagram to kind of look at that. Well, we want an opportunity. We want something we're passionate at, because if we're not passionate at it, we're not as likely to put in the grit that's required to be successful. We need that commitment, and we need the right skills. Either we need the skills ourselves, or we need to be able to acquire them. Okay. That's the sweet spot. That's what we want to look for. Okay. So let's just say you decide as a group to start looking at what types of problems. And let's just say you say, gosh, this is an ag tech school. A lot of things happen here in the agriculture industry. I think we should go to ag tech. Well, that's fine and dandy if you're passionate about it, if you see an opportunity, if you're committed to it. But if you don't have the skills, you have to figure out how you're going to get those skills. If you don't have those skills, no one will invest in you. The team matters. So if you don't have the skills, how can you get those skills? And as part of your business plan, you will tell me, well, we don't have these skills today. This is how we're going to acquire these skills. We're all going to study, or probably more successfully, we're going to partner with someone over in the CNAS college, a professor. And it's not just a professor, it's this is the professor we've talked to, they're interested in joining our venture, and this is the role that we expect. That's the sort of thing that you need to be able to do when you're defining what the skills are on your team. If I were to go out and say, I'm really passionate about plant-based meat, I'm committed to making this work, I see an opportunity, it's a huge opportunity, by the way, but I don't have any skills on my team, and I don't have a realistic way to show investors that I will have those skills, I've already thought that through, I am not going to get $1 of money, even though it's a big area and there's a lot of investment dollars going on. Okay, so you've got to find in that area to help you. Okay. All right, so some myths about entrepreneurship. One, it's easy, it is not. Okay. I can tell you, from things like collecting money from customers, I deal with this every single day, trying to collect money from customers that owe me money. Okay. It's not easy to do. On top of it, there's so many things you have to handle in the beginning. There's payroll, you have to set all that up, financials, marketing, customer support, hiring people, that sort of thing, okay? Glamorous. It's not like Elon Musk going out in the big, fancy cars, having, $500 dinners. In the beginning, it is not like that, okay? And most companies will fail, so it's unlikely, statistically, that you're going to end up in this situation where you get rich quick, you're glamorous, and it's easy work. Okay? Elon Musk works so many hours. I unfortunately had to adopt one of his approaches of scheduling. Okay? You'll notice my blocks. My day is effectively chunked up into 10-minute increments throughout my day. Okay? I have 2 spreadsheets, one for January through March, the other from April to June, because I teach at 2 schools that are in different academic systems. That's what I build my calendar on. Okay? My classes are in there, and then all my business stuff fits into the chunks in between, and everything is broken up into 10-minute chunks. So that's why if you come to my office, have an appointment, that I could have something else already scheduled, because I've broken up my day accordingly. Okay? But you have to be able to effectively manage your time, because entrepreneurship can be very hard. So one of the important things entrepreneurs should do, though, is be willing to learn from a failure. You're going to, okay? Anyone who's successful has important whether you go into starting your own company or you go into the workplace and you go work for someone else. Everybody fails. You have to understand how you learn from those failures. Entrepreneurs learn from it. I've started other companies and I've failed. Okay, and I'll tell you why. My first company I started when I was in had this brilliant idea the internet was, and I said I'm gonna run a company that does internet marketing. Okay? Didn't know anything about marketing. Didn't know how to sell. Didn't know anything. And I'm in a podunk little town in the Midwest. Okay? I went out and I spent all of the money that I had on software to do the marketing, a new computer, and then I had no money to actually do any marketing for myself, so I had to rely on word of mouth. I didn't know how to sell, so I would go out to customers. Could you do a demo for me? Could you do it for me? And I would do it for free. They'd say thank you, and then I would never make any money. I ended up very quickly, by the way, within a few months of starting it. I probably, if I'd been smarter about it and understood I'd taken a class like this, I probably could have sustained it through college and not had to work 60 hours a week when I was in college at a Burger King, okay? So it could have changed considerably. The other thing is experimentation. Experiment, I don't mean experiment with that, okay? I mean like experiment with a class or something or in your workplace, okay? Experimentation, and I'll give you an example of this for a company that had this problem of, we had a customer contract that stipulated we had to provide a certain amount of storage to them. Had to use this thing called a SAN. Okay, if you probably have heard of a SAN before, it's a storage area network. They're not cheap, but millions of dollars potentially. Or technically we leased it, and the customer was way off on their estimates of how much data they had. So we filled it up. We couldn't afford to go out and buy another one or lease another one. We just didn't have the capital. So how do we solve our storage issues for this customer? So my team said, well, we got some ideas, but we don't know if they're going to work. And I said, fine. And so they went out and tested 4 or 5 different things. These 2 didn't work at all, so we shouldn't even consider them. Worked okay, but it's not ideal. These other 2 worked great. Which way should we go? And I said, why don't you test it at a larger scale? So they started with a small test, experimenting. They broadened that scope to be much larger than that. Okay. In the end, we were able to do something that saved us a lot of money. We never had to buy another multi-million-dollar machine again. We're able to scale as clients needed us to scale. And it was entirely free because it was open source software. So we didn't pay anything for it. All we did was we went around the office and all the old hard drives that we pulled out of laptops when people left, we saved the data out to CD-ROMs and DVDs, blew away the hard drive, threw it in these cheap computers that we bought, we actually made ourselves, and now we've got this storage system across all of our facilities worldwide. Okay? A dime on it. Okay? That was experimentation. I'll give you one other example. Even experimentation can happen, and it's very important. I worked at Oracle. Okay? Oracle is not known for being it's quite the opposite. It's a bureaucratic organization. I worked in an organization where we had some latitude to do experimentation. We experimented with ways to improve the efficiency of systems. And as part of the experimentation, some very interesting things that we were able to, and eventually made it into an actual Oracle product that you can go buy. Okay? All because we were experimenting. It's a bureaucratic organization. If I had just gone ask permission to go do this, it never. So you have to be able to embrace doing experiments. Okay. The other thing is forming and testing hypotheses. Okay. Rapidly. So let's just say anybody picked an industry. Thinking of doing anybody yet? I'll make something up. Let's say that go into the artificial meat category. Pretty much hamburgers. The company is doing hamburger. Let's just think that pork is the most in the world. Okay, I want to somehow have to go kill a pig to, and my hypothesis is that I'm going to be able to that customers want it, but they are more likely to buy it if I sell it to them. I don't know, a roast form. Okay. I can go out and I can go test that theory by asking customers at restaurants and stuff, would you buy fake pork if it was in a roast form? I can learn very quickly whether to pay for something like that. Okay. Well, no, because people don't really order pork roast that much in a restaurant. We don't really serve that. What we do want is something more versatile. If you were to offer ground pork, that would be much more versatile. They'd actually be more willing to purchase something like that. Okay. So we can go and get that data. That's where that market research, talking to the customer, is very important. We don't want to go out and spend all this money, millions of dollars, developing a fake pork roast that maybe we sell a year of that and people really want ground fake. So that's why we want to test those things early. Okay? Oops. So what we end up with is entrepreneurship is sort of like the scientific method. We form a hypothesis, we test it, we gather data, we go back, maybe we form a different hypothesis, right? And we just keep repeating that until we get to the point where we get something that. So entrepreneurship is identifying and exploiting opportunities. Moving on to starting a business. Well, we have to acquire those needed skills somehow, whether ourselves, we hire the right people, or someone who's willing to maybe work for equity being stock or ownership in the company, which is what a lot of startups have to do. Okay. If you go on AngelList, has anybody ever heard? Okay. Where startups post jobs and things like that. A lot of jobs on there say $1 a year, CTO or something. Not a lot of money. CTOs typically make 6 figures, okay? But they'll say, we'll give you 10% equity in the company. A lot of startups have to pay their early employees in forms of the equity in the company, as opposed to actually a monetary compensation that you can walk away with and go spend, okay? So that's one way to acquire the skills. If you were a genetics startup, you could go out and say, hey, you know, we really like you to advise the company, scientist, but we don't have any money to pay you. Could we get you to do it for a 5% stake in the company? Okay. And that might be a way. Another way could be to go out and take a class. Okay. So even if you've graduated college and you're moving on and start a business, you could go back and take a class in an area that you're not familiar with, even if you're not intending to get a degree in that area. Okay. The next thing is you've got to find a good opportunity and solution. Okay. Then you've got to acquire the resources you need. And then the last step is before you actually launch the company, is you've got to solidify the legal aspects. Okay. Talk about that later in the course. There's a whole chapter on the legal aspects of a company. But I can tell you that today, forming a company is a lot easier. And I'll go through that real briefly here in a second. Okay. So ideas are great. Everybody has great ideas. Okay. The people who execute on those ideas. Okay. Example, I've got friends who have, and they have really great ideas, but every time they execute on them. Okay. They may not be 100% successful, but at least they execute on their ideas, they learn from it, and then they move on. So you can either have the skills, you can learn the skills, and there's an article about Elon Musk about how he acquired the skills for SpaceX. You can hire people with the skills, you can do all of the above. Usually it's a mixture of all of the above, okay? It would be very difficult for you as a human being to learn all the skills you need in your business. So the opportunity solution piece of that is you identify a problem, you come up with a solution, that's part of the ideation phase, okay? You form a hypothesis, you test it, you gather data, you refine, you repeat, okay? You go back to the beginning there until you come up with something that actually will work. A lot of companies that exist today, hot startups and whatnot, have pivoted. Twitter was not originally Twitter. It was another company that created something that they called Twitter. And then they said, oh, this other thing we were working on is not really valuable. We're not going to work on that anymore. We're going to focus on Twitter. Okay. So opportunity, you conduct market research. Why? This helps you get, okay? It also allows you to see product market fit. This is one of the things that the Epic Center here on campus really tries to drill into the entrepreneur's head. And some people will listen, and some people will think they know better than these people who have started their own companies and sold them for hundreds of millions. So a lot of times the individuals will just go ahead and I'm going to go with this idea anyways. I don't care what anybody else thinks. And then they spend millions and millions of dollars of their own money or investor money chasing something that's never going to go take off in the marketplace. Right? There are companies locally that do that sort of thing. They are never going to take off. They're never going to scale. But the CEO or founder or whatever is, they aren't going to listen to anybody else. They would rather bankrupt themselves personally and bankrupt their friends and family than let the. You've got to find product market. That's where the market research comes in. So you've got research, which is things that you can go and get two types of data: quantitative numbers, you can get interviews, etc. Right? Qualitative, I think qualitative is very valuable. And I do this when I'm doing software development because I want to understand what the customers want. And so I great way to get a bunch of people together to talk with focus groups. You can get in there some start thinking what the group says. So sometimes it's better because you learn what that one customer wants. Having someone's idea kind of twisted based on. You can also observe. Research is what I was talking about the library. There are public data sources. Now, there are a lot of that have done research on markets and things like that. It's going to have a wealth of databases. That's what the library is for. If you've never gone to the library and talked to a librarian, this class. Research is not going to be you going out on Google, doing a quick search and finding a blog post or an article about, I don't know, something is a $90 trillion industry. Okay? That's hogwash. Okay? There are firms that do a lot of research and that literally look at the market. And one of them is called Gartner, and the other is called Forrester. There are other ones as well. Okay. I do not know if that's available to you through the library or not. Okay. So the library can help you find alternatives to Gartner and Forrester research. However, if you go to, say, SpaceX's website, and SpaceX cites, and they have to cite Gartner study, you obviously don't have access to the Gartner study, and they've got a citation in there, you could probably at least utilize that in combination with other research that you do. Okay. So you might find, SpaceX is a really bad example. Let's say Dell EMC is a big tech company. They use Gartner and Forrester research all the time. They might say that Gartner named them as the leader in some particular category of technology, and that this is a $40 trillion market according to Gartner. Okay. You could probably assume that that is reliable data because Gartner is not something, Forrester are not companies that just go out and make stuff up. Okay. They actually do research. They pay tons of researchers around the world to do this data research for them. Okay. Also find data from the federal government, maybe state governments, not so much local governments usually, but federal and state governments usually have a lot of data that you can use to determine the market. So let's just say that you want to move into food space, okay? Yeah, for food. Well, the Department of Agriculture and all these other government agencies have data on crops and farm production and things like that. So if your idea is to, you're going to find a wealth of public record data out there on that sort of thing. Okay? If you're going into the green space and you're interested in that, not only are you going to find a lot of data on your own, but there's been a lot of research. And I will caution you with some areas, and this is pretty common. In the last couple of years, some data has been removed from government sites, so you may not find accurate data in some studies there. You might have to go to the has been archived. I know the EPA's website, a lot of information in the last few years. Okay, so the EPA website anymore, but fortunately, okay, if you go to the Wayback Machine, Internet Archive.org or something like that, it's called the. That might have those data points that you're lacking. Okay, but the librarians can help you find. And then here's some three articles that you can read if you want on market research to help you out with determining product market fit. Now, on the resource side, for capital, we have natural capital, financial capital, and then intellectual. has 3 categories underneath it: human, organizational, social. I'll go through those here in a second. So the first, this is things like raw materials. So water, minerals, the energy required for your business. There can be ecological. Then there can also be threats. Okay? So for example, clear cutting forest might be a threat to some types of businesses. Okay? Overfishing could be another one. Climate change could be another example of a threat. Okay? If you're relying upon and one of these threats comes into play, it could affect the availability of that resource. Give you an example. Let's just say that you're a company in the space of, you need honey. You need honey for some product that you make. You make a honey-based food additive that allows you to replace meat or something. I don't know, I'm making this up. Well, there could be ecological issues that are affecting the honeybee population. Non-native species coming in and killing off the population, could be human activities killing off the population, whatever it might be. That could impact your business. Okay? That's natural capital that can affect your business and that you need. Then you have obviously the financial capital. So money talks. Securities. Okay? Securities being things like stocks and options and things like that. Even bonds to get capital into your business. Land as well. Land is an asset that you can use as capital for your business. Okay. Then you've got the intellectual capital, and this is where a lot of the organization's actual capital is from, is the people. Okay. Or the organization might have things like intellectual property, patents, trademarks, trade secrets. That's valuable to an organization. And then the social capital, and this is becoming, I think it's just because of the internet that this is becoming more well known as the social capital. It's the relationships within a business. Okay? If you have a business and everybody hates each other and can't stand working together, you have very low social capital. But if you have this team that works together and you just love working together, you're going to be more likely to be more successful. And you see a lot more companies these days that fit into that category of really having that social capital. I'll give you some examples. Automatic, entirely remote company. They don't have any offices. Okay? They all get together though several times a year, and they have these big blowout events where they get to know each other and they do team building, and they really build a great culture within their organization. Okay? There are a lot of examples of that today of companies that have a great social capital. But let's go into human capital. This is the skills, the knowledge, and the experience that people that work for an organization have. Okay? So we all bring something unique to the table in an organization. That is a form of capital for the organization. When someone leaves, it can be pretty painful to replace them. Then in the organizational capital side, you have things, I've already mentioned a few of them, but you have things like your computers, your laptops, your servers, et cetera. You have software that you develop. You have your own customer databases. You have databases about your product. You have patents, trade secrets, copyrights, trademarks. You have your company culture, and then your unique management methodologies of how you run the company. And I'll give you another example of this one. GitLab. Has anybody heard of GitLab? Nobody. Okay, one person. GitLab is a company that is, again, entirely remote. But what's unique about GitLab is they have their entire company handbook published online. It's not a light reading, but if you're sitting at the airport or whatever, and you have time to read about a 600-page document, they have their entire employee handbook online. There are some things that they don't publish online, but most of everything that they do, they publish online. All of their philosophies, how they manage their people, how they hire people. If you're interested in working for them, it's worth a read, okay? That's part of their organizational capital, but they've decided this is organizational capital that they want to make open source and make available to anybody to leverage and improve their business, okay? The next type is the social capital, okay? I mentioned that. We have employees, we have customers, we have a community, okay? And then what is the impact that that social capital has? If our employees are so happy and they love working together and they want to help the community, that raises our social capital. If our employees every year volunteer 10,000 hours to their communities, that raises our social capital as an organization, okay? And it impacts the communities around us, okay? Then we have this concept of entrepreneurial capital, which is entrepreneurial competence and commitment. Okay, those two things combined equal our entrepreneurial capital. So the competence is us recognizing an opportunity and then gathering and managing all those resources we need to fulfill that opportunity. Okay. And then the commitment is kind of all along the lines of grit there, and the commitment from earlier is we allocate the time and the energy to make that opportunity come to fruition. Which then leads us to the legal aspect, okay? And having a law degree, I'm going to talk about this a lot later in the course, okay? But you have things like the location. And there are restrictions on the location you can choose, but let's say that you want to incorporate in Delaware. Okay? It's a place where a lot of companies are formed. My company is actually incorporated in Delaware, not California, okay? For a variety of reasons. But then you also have to register your primary business location as, so say here in California, as a foreign corporation in California. So my company is a Delaware corporation. It's a C Corp, which is a type of corporation. And it's registered as a foreign corporation doing business in California. Okay. There's a lot of paperwork involved. Now, I took the approach of using a service. I could have spent the time doing this. Obviously, I have a law degree. I could do that, right? I didn't want to take the time. I had too many other things that I needed to focus on. I didn't want to take the time to figure out how to fill out all the paperwork correctly and risk screwing something up. So I used Gust Launch to help launch it. I filled out a form online. I got a phone call from a guy. He talked to me through the process, asked me some questions. They submitted everything for me. And now all of my corporate records and board meeting minutes and stuff like that are in a portal, which I will show you later in the course, called Gust Launch. Now, how many of you have heard of Stripe? Okay. Stripe is a payment system, but they also have a corporate formation group that does the same thing as Gust effectively, okay, called Stripe Atlas. You could also do it with an attorney, or you could do DIY it, okay? Now, the type of entity, there are different types. So a C Corp is effectively a corporation that's taxed as a corporation, okay, a separate entity. Okay, you issue stock, it's treated as a, it's an it has ink on the end or corporation or something like that on the end. It's a formal corporation, okay? An S Corp is a special type of corporation where the profits are rolled into the owner's personal income tax. So there's not a corporate income tax per se, okay? The profits are then distributed and the taxation happens at the individual level. It's simpler to set up. You don't have the formalities that you have with the C Corp. C Corp, you have to have formalities. You have to have board meetings, okay? You have to have very formal processes, et cetera. LLC is a special type of company. Contrary to popular belief, it does not stand for a limited liability corporation. It stands for limited liability company. These are a state chartered institution. You can't form an LLC at the federal level, okay? An LLC you form in California or you form it in Delaware, wherever it might be. It gives you individual protections so that if you screw up or something happens, your customers or your employees can't come after you individually. Although there are a few exceptions I won't get into in this class related to employment law. In California in particular, employees can come after you individually if you do something bad, okay? So there are some protections of employees in California that may not exist elsewhere. Partnerships. Okay? This is just where, say, you two guys decide you have an idea. You say, let's do a 50-50 split. No formal organization. You've just decided to form a partnership. And then at the end of the year on your taxes, you give each other, the organization gives you each a K-1 form that you file with your taxes, your partnership income. Okay. And then the last one is sole proprietorship. You just decide to start your own business. You go file a DBA that, I don't know, Massive Consulting Corporation is just the DBA for your first and last name. Okay. Now, ownership, there's an article there on ownership. When you form a corporation or an LLC, you have to define, even a partnership, you have to define the ownership. Okay. So when I formed my corporation, Gust made me go through this process of defining my ownership. And so I own 75% of the issued shares and my wife owns 25%. Well, you say, that's stupid, professor. Why do you do that? Because California's community property state anyways. You both own 50% of the company. We do. The reason for that is from a decision-making perspective, okay, as well as a control perspective for other investors. If we had done 50-50 and we had a disagreement or something later on when we had outside investors, then it would be very difficult, because what if we hated each other's guts or something, okay? So to protect against that, we each technically under California community property law own 50-50 of the company. But for the purposes of day-to-day control, it's based on who's doing the work for the business, okay? She's not involved with the business at all. She has a job, okay? That's her thing. I'm involved with it. So that's how we do the 75-25 split. Now, if you bring in outside investors, that split changes over time, okay? Also, a lot of times when you form a company, you form a pool of stocks. So you say the maximum number of shares that will be issued by the company are, say, 10 million, okay? But that doesn't mean you take that 10 million and you give yourself 10 million shares. It means you say, well, I want to save a pool for future investors, future employees, so I can give them equity. So you set aside some of that and you don't actually issue it, okay? So in my case, I issued 8 million shares. There's 2 million still sitting out there that have never been issued. If I hired employees, I could give some of those shares to other employees. I could give them to investors and things like that in the future, okay? But these are all things you'll have to think about if you're deciding to go down that path. The other thing is, how do you get capital? Okay? One is you can take on debt. Okay? You can get a bank loan. You can get an investor to give you what's called a convertible note. It starts off as debt. You have to pay interest on it. You have to pay the payments, but it can convert to equity at some agreed upon rate later on. And if you don't pay back the money that you owe them, they take ownership of the company, which can dilute what my value is. So if I own 100%, I do a convertible note. It gives them the option to buy $10 million worth of stock in the future. If I don't pay the note, I don't pay the note. They could get $10 million worth of stock, and maybe that gives me only a 10% share going forward, depending on what the value of the company is. So that's how I could potentially capitalize the company. And then I already talked about how to start the organization. Get back to legal stuff later in the quarter. Now, dynamic capitalism here is an interesting concept. We have wealth creation by new firms. These days, it's these internet companies, SaaS, 3D printing, new foodstuffs, that sort of thing. Okay, new firms are coming in, they're creating wealth. It's new money. What we're also seeing simultaneously is the decline of the older firms. So let's just say a company that may have been around for 100 years is suddenly on the decline because they are not innovating anymore. And I'll give you a really great example, okay? Sears. Sears was the Amazon of its day. Made a lot of bad management decisions. And now Sears is a tiny little company, closing stores all the time. They just announced a few months ago that they're going to close, I think, 30 more here in California. I think they have maybe a couple hundred Kmart and Sears stores nationwide now. This was a company that was the largest retailer in the United States for a very long time. They declined. New firms like Amazon and other firms like that have come market share for them. Another thing is disruption of existing markets, creation of new products, and then the life cycle. So you form a company and a product, you grow, and then eventually you decline unless you reinvent yourselves, okay? Walmart's actually an example of a firm that actually reinvented themselves. Okay? They could have been on the decline just like Sears. They made a lot of other choices though. Walmart made the choice to invest heavily in technology. So whereas Sears and JCPenney and a few other older department stores didn't invest anything in technology for years. Their stores were outdated, people stopped going there. Walmart was investing in technology since like the 1980s. Okay? They decided they wanted to have a great inventory and supply chain system. You can't do business with Walmart, by the way, if you don't have that capability. If you're just doing things with paper and pencil and passing checks back and forth, you can't ever be a customer of Walmart. You have to be able to accept electronic payments, do electronic invoicing, interact with their data. Okay? They reinvented themselves. Other companies have done the same. So look at Yahoo. Okay? It doesn't exist. Well, I think it does exist as a website, but as a company, it doesn't exist anymore. Okay? They were once hell of a lot bigger than Google. They were the market leader in search. They lost their way. They went on a decline. They never recovered from it. Meanwhile, Google takes that market share, and Google is trying to reinvent itself. So they've launched Google Cloud Platform to try to take market share from AWS. If you ask me personally, I like the interface in Google Cloud much better. It's much easier to use. I don't have to spend as much time on it. I love it, okay? But they're constantly trying to reinvent themselves. They're taking moonshots. Other companies, not so much. Won't name some of the other companies that aren't doing this, but you could go think about some of the companies that exist out there that aren't changing things. They're not in growth stage anymore. They're on the decline. And that's what I'm talking about there, okay? All right, awesome. All right, so let's look at an example. How many of you remember Blockbuster Video or Hollywood Video, okay? They were like the nationwide chain, but it started off with, back in the early 80s, independent video stores, like the ones that you see in Silent Bob and Clerks and things like that, okay? Jay and Silent Bob, I guess, is the movie. They died off. Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, a couple others acquired those stores, converted them into Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, or they moved into the neighborhood, lower their prices, better service, suddenly the mom and pops go out of business. I know this for a fact because I used to live in a small town. We didn't have a Blockbuster or anything like that, but some friends of my mom's owned a video store, and it was successful. It kept expanding. It was this huge video store. Used to go there as a teenager and as a kid all the time to rent video game consoles. Okay? And then Blockbuster came in, built a store, a huge store. Within a year or two, they were gone. They just blown away the competition. Okay? Because now they had access to a much larger library of videos. They'd started coming out with DVDs. And so there was a lot of other things. Now, unfortunately, Blockbuster and Hollywood did not adapt to changing times. Netflix came in and did DVD rentals. Now you didn't have to drive to the store. You just get one in the mail. Okay? Great idea. It just was disrupting an existing market. Redbox sort of did the same thing, but they're located in grocery stores. Very convenient. You buy your groceries, you can rent a video. Netflix, though, made a pivot in the 2000s where they pivoted to streaming services. And that actually created an entirely new industry where Netflix said, well, we've got the internet. There's been this huge investment in bandwidth. Now we can actually start streaming things where it's not really slow, because at the time when Netflix started, people had dial-up connections. Okay? You couldn't stream video. I've tried. Heck, back in 1994, I downloaded a video off the internet, okay? A trailer for the new Star Trek movie. I was pretty excited about it. You couldn't stream it though. You had to wait for it to download. It took a long time, like hours. Okay? Today, we've got Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, HBO, CBS, NBC, all these different streaming services we can subscribe to, okay? And DVDs, although you can still buy them, you can still buy Blu-rays, they're not as big of a business as they used to be. Okay? The same thing happened with the music streaming business also, okay? Started off with records, 8-tracks, cassette tapes, then CDs, then it went digital with people pirating through Napster. I had to think of that for a second. I had to think of the name because I remember the video of Metallica. It was a parody of Napster and Metallica. And they're beer bad, or Napster bad, beer good. I just remember that. It's very funny. Had to be there, I guess. But now we've got to the point where we've got streaming audio. Okay? People don't generally go buy music anymore. They go to Pandora and Apple Music and whatever else is out there, and they stream the music today. You have more choice. My listening has changed dramatically since that's become affordable. It used to be I would have a budget every year for how much I could spend on iTunes, and I'd easily blow through that budget. Now, I spend a fixed amount. My whole family can stream as much music as we want, so we can listen to whatever. It doesn't matter anymore. We don't buy music anymore. We just stream. Now, innovation and technology. So we've had a lot of new technologies come about that are based on new ideas. We've had new methodologies. We've had this big push for sustainability. A lot of businesses are trying to build sustainable, okay? Because it's not just because it's a buzzword of the day, but because it can help them save money. And they're recognizing that this can have an impact on the entire world if they are sustainable. So in this last wave, which if you go in the book, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 waves, okay? Artificial intelligence is becoming big. Unfortunately, not in this class. We won't really talk about it, but I just got a camera for the 101 class that's from Amazon, and I can put it in the audience here, face it towards you, and it would be able to, in real time, tell you if you're a human being, that's a hat, that's a water bottle, that's a laptop, etc. Okay, that's the type of AI technology that we have going on today. We have robotics. This campus is building a robotics facility in the engineering college. It's gonna be really cool when it's built. Okay, sustainability. There's a lot of initiatives on this campus over in the again in the engineering college, but also probably over in CNAS for sustainability. Internet of Things. More and more devices are getting connected to the Internet of Things. Okay, so garage door openers, door locks, cameras, etc. We have 3D printing. If you're ever in Irvine at UC Irvine, they have a 3D printer that can print huge objects and multiple objects, like for manufacturing purposes. I'm not talking a desktop 3D printer that you could find at Fry's. I'm talking a massive thing that can print a lot of objects in a 24-hour period. And then genomics, which is an area that we have on the campus here. Okay, these are all areas that are pretty big right now. Okay. So some critical materials to review, these tables, okay, and the analysis formula in your textbook. And I'm not allowed to publish them in the slides, so I have to reference the book. All right, so leadership. Leadership's very important as well. So we need to be able to have the skills to transform an organization. So key traits for leaders are adaptability as things change and being willing to acquire new skills as needed. By the way, the skills required in the early stage of a company are vastly different than the skills required as it scales and as it gets huge, okay? So that's why you see maybe a founder CEO starts off as he's the CEO when they first form. They find a professional CEO, the investors bring in a professional. Google's a great example of this. I think it was Larry Page was the CEO. The investors eventually bring in Eric Schmidt. He's the CEO for a long time. Then it goes back when Larry's to the point where he's got the skills. Larry becomes the CEO again. And then he passed it off a few years ago. Okay. So that's very key to be able to do that. All right. Other companies like Facebook have always had the founder as the CEO. Mark's always been the CEO. Okay. He acquired the skills that were necessary, okay, without bringing someone else. All right. This is a practice scenario that you can do. This is not free to do in class, but you should do it because if we have time, I may call on people to share their scenario. Okay? And these slides are online, by the way. Okay. So to wrap up, entrepreneurs have a need. They create solutions. They develop the opportunities, acquire the resources, and start the companies. Entrepreneurship is what really drives economic growth in the world, and entrepreneurship can be learned. Okay? So now we're going to go on to the next unit. Oops. There we go. All right, so now part 2. So opportunities. All right, so identifying and evaluating these opportunities, they're very important. The opportunities, though, they address the market needs. Okay? We might see an opportunity, but if it's not addressing a market need, we're not going to be successful at it. Okay? If we are good at identifying emerging trends, we can often find that leads to new opportunities. Okay? Now, the other thing is, you want to try to find opportunities that match your skills or your interests. If you absolutely hate the area you're going into, you will never be successful. Okay? So if you just are going after something because it's a shiny thing everybody else is going after, you won't be successful at it. Okay? You have to have the passion. You have to have the interest in it. If you don't bother. Pick something else. Okay? And then if you don't have the skills, you should acquire them or hire someone that has them. Okay? So different types of opportunities. There's problem-driven, okay? This is where we assess a problem, we find a solution. Example being Airbnb, okay? Well, we think that there's a market here for renting out our house to someone when we're not using it, okay? Because there's a shortage of hotel rooms when we do a conference in San Francisco or something. By the way, which is a real thing. You go to a conference in San Francisco, if you haven't booked your hotel a year in advance, good luck finding a hotel. You're commuting 60 miles to a hotel in these big conferences that happen there. Not enough hotel rooms. Airbnb has kind of changed that, where you can now get an Airbnb as opposed to trying to find a hotel. Believe me, I've had to pay $800 a night for a tiny little hotel room in a Motel 6 because there were no other rooms available. The second one is solution driven, okay? We've got this new technology, but we really haven't figured out how to apply it to a problem yet. Oh, touchscreen. Got this technology, what can we use that for? Well, what if we replaced our phone keypad with a touchscreen? We've taken and made a solution driven opportunity for ourselves. Okay? There's a figure in the book you should take a look at that kind of illustrates what I was talking about there. So categories of opportunity. Okay? If we increase the value of our product or service, we're doing something along the lines of mint.com. People could get their financial data elsewhere. Right? Quicken's been around or was around for a long time, like 20 some years. Okay? Getting access to your own financial information through your bank's been around for over 20 years. But Mint put it in a way that was easy to use, barrier-free, all of your accounts log in automatically, gather your data, compile it together, analyze it, put it in a dashboard that's easy to use. They changed the approach for using an existing service. New applications of technology, okay? Apple Pay, Google Pay, Samsung Pay, whatever they're called. RFID technology has been around for a very long time. My first job was in the mid-late 90s, and I had this badge, and it would read the card. Okay, RFID technology. Companies use it all the time. We use it. I think our cards do it as well. But it wasn't until recently that we started using that in combination with our phone. They try to do it with credit cards, by the way. They put the RFID technology in the credit card, and it just didn't work very well. It wasn't very secure. So you could clone someone's card that way. So then they said, okay, well, we're going to use it for only small value transactions. You're going to buy a soda, okay, a couple dollars. You can use it. You try to buy a computer with your RFID, we're going to decline the transaction. Okay. With Apple Pay, they've made security, Google Pay, same thing. They've made security a priority, so now it's secure to do that. Okay. And now it's taken off. Most of us are tired of getting our cards compromised, so when we go to the store, we end up using our phone. More secure. Mass market creation, AWS, GCP, Azure. Right? They have created a mass market for cloud services that never existed before. And in the process, they've disrupted larger companies, well, used to be larger companies like Dell, HP, Compaq. These are all former computer server companies that have seen their market share plummet because of cloud technologies. Customization, things like Apple Music. I can create custom stations. I can pull whatever things I want together. Services that do that, that's an area for opportunity. Expanding reach, Netflix shifting from DVDs to streaming, they expanded their reach. You know, when they were doing DVDs, I would imagine that they had to have warehouses with the DVDs. The DVDs would get scratched. They had limited geographic scope. It would take a long time to get your DVD if you lived nowhere near a warehouse. Now, instantaneous market worldwide for their product. Supply chain management, I kind of alluded to that earlier with Walmart. They've seen an opportunity in supply chain management. Okay. Industry convergence, so things like biotech, genetics, there's a lot of industries that are converging together in that space. And so as those industries converge, you can get some opportunities there. Process innovation, Amazon is great at logistics. They're also great at their web services, launching a product like that. But what they're really great is their logistics. Yes, they sell stuff, but they're becoming the world's, if they're not already, the world's largest logistics handler of dealing with logistics, okay? Increase the firm's scale, internet companies, okay? You get a product, you launch it, and then you scale. Google's an example, okay? Start a search, you scale the company, and pretty soon it's the global search, and then they get into these other areas like mail and everything else, okay? These are just different categories of opportunity for you. Okay? So market research. You don't just start doing the market research and then stop. This is an ongoing thing that you do. It's very critical. If you talk to the entrepreneur people who I'm going to try to get in here, they're going to tell you never stop doing that. And you should do that before you do anything else. Because if you don't understand your market, you're going to waste so much time and resources. If you research not viable, then you just spent that time on the research and you haven't spent your time doing anything else. Okay? You gather information from the market and use that to determine the strategy. You assess your customers' potential needs and you verify, okay? And then you iterate and you improve until you get to the point where you really know what your customer looks like, okay, and what they're looking for. In terms of research methods, I mentioned these earlier, so focus group. And the thing with a focus group is, if I were doing research on what a customer wants, and I were to do it with, say, this group of the classroom here, okay? I'm not a neutral party. So if I start asking you questions, you're probably going to be inclined to start agreeing with me, and because of the way I say it. It's helpful to have a neutral third party, not someone in your organization. Bring in a third party moderator. You work and hire someone to go do a moderation of a focus group for you. Okay. I'm not suggesting anybody in this class needs to do that. Okay. For this class, it's okay if you just do the focus group yourself. I think most of you are going to probably want to do interviews anyways. I don't know that a focus group would be, but it depends on what you're looking at doing. Looking at something that's more consumer oriented than a focus group with some students. Okay. And you could just lead it yourselves. Yeah, there's some interview tips. If you're going to do interviews, please read it in the book. So our customer, is their customer value? If not, we go back and we start over. Okay, about when we see customer value, is the customer value sufficient that I'm going to be able to get the customers to pay for it? It's always good to get customer commitment in the beginning. So if you find something, get some customers who are willing to pay for it. Not a lot. And I was just talking to a client that I consult with the other day. She says, how can we grow our business? And I said, well, find doing and offer to them, not for free, but say, you know, this is a value add. It's going to save you millions of dollars in fines. Charge you $100 a month for it. It's not a lot, but it's revenue. You're not giving it away for free, because if someone's already paying for something, if you increase the price, they're less likely to abandon you if they see value in it, because you can see, oh, I'm paying this much value, I'm getting more value. Okay, the cost can go up. If I start with $0, people tend to want it to continue to be free. Okay? If something's free, I'm less likely to be able to get someone to change their mind and start paying for it. So if I always charge them for it, but I give them a seat at the table and I say, I want your feedback. That's the most valuable thing to me. That's going to be very golden for your company. Iterate on your hypothesis. Okay, you have customer ones, problem ones, and product ones. And then once you've got a model that works, you create additional demand and scale it. Okay. And I'll use the WeWork example again. WeWork didn't do this before they scaled. They went in and they said, we think we know what we're doing. We're going to scale, and they scale globally, burning through a lot of cash. Not an economically viable business as we've seen it imploded. Okay. If they'd gone through and figured that out ahead of time, they might have gotten to the point where scaling would have actually been sustainable for them. Okay. Lean startups. So we talked about this in 171. If you didn't have that class, it's okay. There are some resources on a couple slides that follow up to this that you're going to want to read through that are not in the book. Okay. And some videos to watch. Do a parallel process. You do customer development in parallel with product development. So from a customer development, you do the market research I just talked about. In parallel, you do the product development side, which is you're refining the prototypes and mock-ups based on that customer feedback. Okay. So prototypes, mock-ups, that sort of thing, that's all addressed in some of these videos that you'll see here in the slides. You can take a look at on your own time. Lean startups is a theme that is in the textbook, but it's also something that a lot of companies are doing today. We learn from our early customers. We create what's called a minimum viable product. Okay? It's an actual product most of the time. If it's not an actual product, it could just be a functional demo or even just a marketing material. And an example that Eric Rees gives in his book is they created just a splash page with options, made it look like it was a real site. Customers started signing up. They figured out, well, who's signing up for what, what's most popular, and then they based the product on the features that the customer kept picking. Okay? Didn't have to spend a lot of money to do that. Compare that with the way he did things previously at a different startup. He went out and built a huge product, spent a long time on it, like a year, only to find out nobody wanted to buy it. And now he's wasted all that money and time. This allows you to assess demand. It allows you to actually start selling early to early adoption customers who are actually usually willing to pay a little bit of money, not a lot for companies and people, but a lot of times if you have a value in the product early on, people will pay to be an early adopter. You iterate on the features over time, and this lean startup method means less capital to begin with. Okay? You don't need to go raise a $10 million round to start your company. You can get by with $20,000 that you raise from family and friends, that sort of thing. Okay? So this lean product playbook, there's a link here. This is what I'm talking about with the library. If you're here on the campus, you can just click on that link, it will open. If you're off campus, it won't work. You have to connect to the VPN first. Okay? If you don't know how to do the VPN, I'm not able to help you with that, but ITS can. So you can use the student help desk. They can help you get it set up. Okay. Here's a bunch of links that I recommend. If you did not take 171, if you did take it and you don't remember this, I would recommend reading up on these links. Okay. For lean startups. Now, innovation. Innovation is just inventions that generate value. So we have different types: incremental, architectural, component, and disruptive. So incremental is faster, better, cheaper. Okay. We have an iPhone version just with a newer camera, a new processor, no change to the design. Okay, that's an incremental. A Mac version, no change to it. It just has a different processor in it. Okay, we're just making incremental changes to it. Architectural is we're improving the way that components connect to one another. And so the example I have is, let's just say we have a portable air conditioner in every room of our house. Okay. Architecturally, innovating that would be to say, well, why do we have one in every house or every room? Why don't we just build one that can air condition all the rooms? Okay. That would be an architectural innovation. Another example would be moving from, say, a ceiling fan to a floor fan or to a desk fan. Okay. We haven't really changed anything other than how we fit those components together. Okay. A component innovation, on the other hand, is where we're improving the components without disrupting the entire system. So an example would be the Ring doorbell camera. We're not going and saying we have to go create a new way to interact with your doorbell. All we're doing is we're putting a doorbell on it that has a camera, and the doorbell part just rings your existing inside doorbell in your house. And I've done it myself. It's just an electrical wire. We didn't change the way it's architecturally designed. The camera part, however, is new. That uses my existing wireless network. I didn't have to do anything new architecturally to hook it up. Same thing with like a Nest thermostat. We didn't change the whole heating system and how it's designed. What we did was we just popped the thermostat off, popped the new one on. We didn't change it architecturally. Okay, we've changed the individual component. And the final example I have is a smart door lock. Okay, if we really wanted to be fancy and change the way this worked, we would change the whole design of the door and the way that doors lock in general. But with a component innovation, we've taken an old-fashioned door lock like we have here. We put a mechanical door lock on it that has a motor inside that's electronically controlled that turns the motor, which turns the lock, just like it is any other time we have a lock, okay? These are all component innovations. Then we have the one that we hear a lot about is disruptive, okay? We have new components, new architecture combined, okay? Things like 3D printing, that's disrupting the manufacturing industry. Things like cloud software, that's disrupting not only software companies, it's disrupting hardware companies, it's disrupting entire industries. It's making it where your startups can actually be economically viable with little funding, okay? And to give you an example, in the 2000s, early 2000s and late 90s, the internet was this big new thing, okay? And all of these dot-coms erupted and they raised millions of dollars each. A lot of them went out of business because it wasn't sustainable. They had to go out and they had to go buy millions of dollars in hardware, pay millions of dollars for employees, millions of dollars for software. Today, yeah, you have to pay for the employees still, but the hardware and software, the software could be free now. Open source software exists in a lot of areas that didn't before. Hardware-wise, you can go out to the cloud, get it, and you pay it as you use it. So if you build it and the customers don't come, the worst case scenario is you're paying for a little bit of capacity. Back in the 2000s when all those companies imploded, they were having to buy their own data centers, buy their own hardware, build it out, hoping the customers came, and then when they didn't, they were still paying that money even though they didn't have the customers in. Okay? So there's been a lot of changes. It's now more possible for a small company to compete with a larger one from a technology perspective. Sources of innovation, we have things within companies, things like hackathons. Okay, the campus, by the way, sometimes has hackathons, contests, patent awards. I've worked for companies where you get a patent award. It's a monetary compensation for coming up with patents, if it gets filed, not if you just come up with an idea. So they have a process of, here's how we capture ideas. I was on a patent review committee at Oracle, so anytime someone invented something, I was on the team that would actually review it to see whether it was something that could be patented or not. And if it was, then the person was eligible for a monetary bonus. And then once the issue, so patents are a funny thing, you file the patent, and then years later, it might get issued, it might not. So then there's another award for if it gets issued, you get a really fancy glass plaque, okay? So that's one way. Another way is universities do a lot of innovation. So UCR, may not, because most of you are probably in the business school, you may not realize this, but UCR has done a lot of innovations, a lot around citrus. So we've developed as a campus ways to prevent citrus from getting attacked by disease. It's happened on this campus. UC has a patent for that. Okay? So that's another source of innovation is universities. Individual inventors can come up with things, and then believe it or not, users of a particular product can come up with a better way of doing things. So if we see something we don't like it, we can come up with a new way of doing it. Now, trends in general can lead to opportunities. We're almost done. So social trends. When we start thinking about health and diversity and the rising middle class, religion, sex, media, education, all these things, those are social aspects that can lead to opportunities. In IT, software, the internet, cloud, mobile, okay? Food, plant-based meat is a big one right now. I just saw an article that Impossible, they sell the Whopper, Impossible Whopper at Burger King, but they're making a new pork-based product, which is why I mentioned it's fresh in my mind, okay? AI, self-driving cars, Siri, Alexa, Cortana, that sort of thing, okay? We've got space, we've got SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, a number of other companies that are going out and just tapping a brand new market of space. It's never been done before. It's always been in the government realm. There could be the exploitation of resources. There could be tourism. Who knows what that industry could lead to, okay? On the green side, electric cars are really becoming big now. And companies like Tesla, we all hear about them all the time, but did you know that a lot of other companies make electric cars and trucks and things like that? Ford's doing it. They've got an electric Mustang. They've got an F-150 coming out. Chevy has a Bolt and a bunch of other vehicles coming out, et cetera. Things like solar and wind power and fuel cells. The technology and industry convergence is the last thing we're going to talk about today. And that's the example of like a smartphone. Okay, a smartphone was really just the convergence of GPS technologies, phone technologies, the internet, music, video, photos, health, finance, virtual assistants. There used to be a time when everybody had to carry a PDA, a phone, a pager, a camera, a media player or a Walkman or something, okay? This has all been combined into a device that fits in our pocket, okay? This was a convergence of technologies across different industries to make this happen. This is another opportunity for people who see this vision of what can we bring together, okay? With that, I'm gonna let you go. Just be sure on Tuesday, everybody needs to have one person from their group bring your meeting minutes up. I'll have a folder up here to put them in. Be sure to put them in there. I will try to get back to you with your group number and your group letters for individuals within a week. And then the following week is when your actual concept paper is due. And I will get back to you in a week to let you know if your idea is good or not, or if you need to change it. All right, thanks.